Mr. President, I think we need to argue over facts when we get into these debates. We're going to have a tremendous number of debates. And yes, we will debate on health care at some point. But yesterday, and what we did yesterday, was focused on the border, on national defense, and on reboosting our energy production in America. I encourage a strong yes vote for Robert F. Kennedy to be the next Secretary of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services.
Mr. President,
Senator from Oregon.
I would ask unanimous consent for 1 minute for an opportunity to respond to my colleague from Idaho.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would only say to my friend from Idaho that he says this is not going to happen, that people are going to be safe and seniors on Medicaid and the like will be safe. I would just say to my colleague, it starts today in the other body of Congress. I'd say to my colleague, the process of setting in motion these cuts to essential health care services begins today. We can read about it in the publications about the congressional schedule. I look forward to working with my colleague when we can find common ground. But on this point that it's not going to happen, everybody's going to be safe, the efforts to cut these vital programs, including Medicaid, begins this morning in the other body, and I yield the floor.
Could I have 30 seconds to just respond? I ask unanimous consent.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I would simply say that we hear this every time we look at trying to address the spending excesses in our government. And I will just say to my colleague and to everyone, we're not going to take health care away from children. We're not going to take health care away from adults, from seniors, or
to every senator and the millions of Americans that will be impacted by this horrific nomination. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle, I implore you, think one last time about this vote. My colleagues on the Republican side, you know the consequences of what you're doing. My colleagues on the Republican side, you know how dangerous this is. My colleagues on the other side, you know you are not putting your constituents, their health, their families first when you vote yes. To quote my colleague, the junior senator from Texas, just a few years ago, he said, quote, "We need an expert. We need a scientist. We need someone who knows something about health care heading the Health and Human Services Department." Well, which is Robert Kennedy? An expert? A scientist? Or what about the senior senator from Louisiana, the chair of the Health Committee, and a well-respected medical professional himself? A few years ago, here's what he said. Previous HHS secretaries have had a pharmaceutical industry background, have been a state health commissioner, have run health systems, have been governors. Somebody who has had a background in actually administering the programs that HHS administers. I ask my colleagues, which of these qualifications does RFK possess? You know the answer, none of them. The question in front of this body today, the question in front of this body is not simply to confirm RFK to run the nation's health department. The question before us is very simple. Which is more important to you? The health and well-being of your constituents, or blindly obeying orders, knowing full well the dangerous impacts your vote will enable? I plead with you one more time, rethink this issue. This is dangerous, this is wrong, very wrong. I yield the floor.
Under the previous order, all post-cloture time is expired. The question occurs on the Kennedy nomination. Is there a sufficient second? There appears to be. Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsobrooks, Ms. Baldwin, Mr. Banks, Mr. Barrasso, Mr. Bennett, Mrs. Blackburn, Mr. Blumenthal, Ms. Blunt-Rochester, Mr. Booker, Mr. Bozeman, Mrs. Britt, Mr. Budd, Ms. Cantwell, Mrs. Capito, Mr. Cassidy, Ms. Collins, Mr. Coons, Mr. Cornyn. Ms. Cortez Masto. Mr. Cotton, Mr. Kramer, Mr. Crapo, Mr. Cruz, Mr. Daines, Ms. Duckworth, Mr. Durbin, Ms. Ernst, Mr. Fetterman, Mrs. Fisher, Mr. Gallego, Mrs. Gillibrand, Mr. Graham, Mr. Grassley, Mr. Haggerty, Ms. Hassan, Mr. Hawley, Mr. Heinrich, Mr. Hickenlooper, Ms. Hirono, Mr. Hoven, Mr. Husted, Mrs. Hyde-Smith, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Justice, Mr. Kane, Mr. Kelly, Mr. Kennedy, Mr. Kim, Mr. King, Ms. Klobuchar, Mr. Langford, Mr. Lee, Mr. Lujan, Ms. Lummis, Mr. Markey, Mr. Marshall, Mr. McConnell, Mr. McCormick, Mr. Merkley, Mrs. Moody, Mr. Moran, Mr. Moreno, Mr. Mullen, Ms. Murkowski, Mr. Murphy, Mrs. Murray, Mr. Ossoff, Mr. Padilla, Mr. Paul, Mr. Peters, Mr. Reed, Mr. Ricketts, Mr. Risch, Ms. Rosen, Mr. Rounds, Mr. Sanders, Mr. Schatz, Mr. Schiff, Mr. Schmidt, Mr. Schumer, Mr. Scott of Florida, Mr. Scott of South Carolina, Mrs. Shaheen, Mr. Sheehy, Ms. Slotkin, Ms. Smith, Mr. Sullivan, Mr. Thune, Mr. Tillis, thank you, Mr. Tuberville, Mr. Van Hollen, Mr. Warner, Mr. Warnock, Ms. Warren, Mr. Welch, Mr. Whitehouse, Mr. Wicker, Mr. Wyden, Mr. Young. Senators voting in the affirmative: Bozeman, Cornyn, Crapo, Graham, Mullen, Risch, Rounds, and Tuberville. Senators voting in the negative: Bennett, Gallego, Lujan, Markey, Schumer, and Wyden. Mr. Wicker, aye. Mr. Marshall, aye. Mr. Moreno, aye. Mrs. Britt, aye. Mr. Heinrich, no. Mr. Justice, aye. Mr. Sullivan, aye. Mrs. Blackburn, aye. Ms. Baldwin, no. Mr. Murphy, no. Mr. Cotton, aye. Ms. Also Brooks, no. Ms. Warren, no. Mr. Young, aye. Mr. Kelly, no. Mr. Johnson, aye. Ms. Ernst, aye. Mr. Durbin, no. Mr. Cassidy, aye. Mr. Sanders, no. Ms. Hassan, no. Mr. Peters, no. Mr. Barrasso, aye. Mr. Reed, no. Mr. Curtis, aye. Mr. Ricketts, aye. Mr. Thune, aye. Mr. Ossoff, no. Mr. Haggerty, aye. Mr. Van Hollen, no. Ms. Rosen, no. Mr. Banks, aye. Mr. Tillis, aye. Ms. Duckworth, no. Mr. McCormick, aye. Ms. Cortez Masto, no. Mrs. Hyde-Smith, aye. Ms. Blunt Rochester, no. Ms. Collins, aye. I did, thank you. Mr. Langford, aye. Mr. Sheehy, aye. Mrs. Murray, no. Mr. Hoven, aye. Mr. Scott of South Carolina, aye. Mr. Merkley, no. Mr. Budd, aye. Mrs. Gillibrand, no. Mr. Moran, aye. Mr. Fetterman, no. Mr. Schatz? No. Ms. Smith? No. Mr. Husted, aye. Ms. Lemus? Aye. Mrs. Capito, aye. Ms. Cantwell, no. Mr. Kramer, aye. Mr. Kim, no. Ms. Murkowski, aye. Mr. Coons, no. Mr. Kane, no. Mr. Warner, no. Mr. King, no. Mr. Warnock, no. Mr. McConnell, no. Mr. Schmidt, aye. Mr. Cruz, aye. Mr. Lee, aye. Mrs. Moody, aye. Mr. Daines, aye. Mr. Schiff, no. Mr. Booker, no. Mr. Padilla, no. Mr. Blumenthal, no. Mr. Hawley, aye. Mr. Kennedy, aye. Ms. Hirono, no. Mr. Grassley, aye. Fisher, aye. Ms. Slotkin, no. Ms. Klobuchar, no. Mr. Whitehouse, no. Mr. Hickenlooper, no. Mr. Scott of Florida, aye. Mr. Welch, no. Mrs. Shaheen, no.
No, the sound has not cut off. We're just awaiting the final tally. Hello to everyone who's tuning in. We're breaking records today. We have almost 3,000 people listening live to this momentous occasion as we await the official numbers. Let's hear it. Many of us have been waiting for this moment for forever. Some folks have been doing this for decades, and this moment represents their decades, their life's work. And I'm here happy to be with all of you for this momentous occasion. Shout out to Ruti Guten, who is one of the producers of Cafecito Break. Sending hello to everyone who's listening across the platforms. Cafecito Break is currently live on X, YouTube, and on Instagram. Shout out to Major Victory and L. Thank you for participating in the comments today. This has felt like the long journey up the rocky mountain filled with ice and all sorts of stormy weather. And I want to just say a special thank you for all of the Maha moms, you beautiful lions, and the Maha papas, and the titis and the tios, all of you who have put so many hours of your lives and dedicated so much of your time because you knew that there were many things that were not okay with the
Mr.
children.
Paul, aye.
On this vote, the yeas are 52, the nays are 48. The confirmation is confirmed.
Oh my God.
Just number 4.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr. 52
Under the previous order, the
yeses.
motion to reconsider is considered made and laid upon the table, and the President will be immediately notified of the Senate's action. Under the previous order, the cloture motion with respect to the Rollins nomination is withdrawn. The clerk will report the Rollins nomination.
Department of Agriculture, Brooke Rollins of Texas to be secretary.
The question occurs on the nomination. Is there a sufficient second? There appears to be. Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Also Brooks, Ms. Baldwin, Mr. Banks, Mr. Barrasso.
Hello, everyone. How's everybody feeling on this day? You're listening to Cafecito Breaks feed. We believe so. We're stand by.
Mr. Bennett, Mrs. Blackburn, Mr. Blumenthal, Ms. Blunt Rochester, Mr. Booker, Mr. Bozeman, Mrs. Britt, Mr. Budd, Ms. Cantwell, Mr. Cassidy, Ms. Collins, Mr. Coons, Mr. Cornyn, Ms. Cortez Masto, Mr. Cotton, Mr. Kramer, Mr. Crapo, Mr. Cruz, Mr. Curtis, Mr. Daines, Ms. Duckworth, Mr. Durbin, Ms. Ernst, Mr. Fetterman, Mrs. Fisher, Mr. Gallego, Mrs. Gillibrand, Mr. Graham, Mr. Grassley, Mr.
Mi
Haggerty,
gente,
Ms.
it's official.
Hassan,
Robert
Mr.
F. Kennedy
Hawley,
Jr.,
Mr. Heinrich,
congratulations on
Mr.
your
Hickenlooper,
historical
Mr.
win.
Rono, Mr. Hoven,
Yo no lo puedo creer. Let me remove this overlay. Stand by, mi gente. All right. Oh my God. Okay, mi gente. Congratulations. RFK Jr. is the HHS secretary. Can you believe it? RFK Jr. has been confirmed HH secretary with a vote of 52 to 48. I have noted who voted no. And I think we all have. It's a very telling season. And I thank all of you for joining us. I have a little, as I was saying, I just want to take a moment to say thank you to all of the Maha moms and dads, and especially the mamas, because you guys are so instrumental to why we're even here today. It was your intuition. It was your insistence. It was your knowing. I know something's not right with the health system. I know my doctor's not telling me everything. My doctor may not be knowing everything. I know something's not okay with my son or daughter after they've taken this medication or this injection. This is really, truly a momentous occasion. Ruthie Gutzen is saying tears of happiness. Oh my God. Yes. Yes. It's official. RFK is the HHS secretary. Yep. And it's what Ruthie Gutzen is saying. Now the work begins. May God protect him as he carries out his duties. Definitely. I agree with that sentiment, Ruthie Gutzen. May that be so. We need to protect that man. And, you know, we can't, this is not time to kick back and like if la cosita no están pasando. This is when, you know, our efforts are going to be needed more than ever. And I want to bring up a little. Let me see if it comes up. Here we go. So, mi gente, a little bit about the Perez sisters of Cafecito Break and Ruthie Gutzen, who's listening in. We are certified holistic health coaches, I believe since 2010, as Ruthie pointed out. And so we've been on this Maha journey before we even knew what Maha was, to be honest. But we knew that something was really wrong with our system, our medical system. And one of the reasons that I felt the need to be a part of learning more about the wealth is just because my own family statistics were so horrible. Our own dad passed away at 60, and out of 12 brothers and sisters, he only has one person, sibling left, and many of them have passed away really, really young. And when you have alarming statistics in your family, when you realize that perhaps we haven't been consuming not just in what we're eating, but everything, the environment, our water, the things that we utilize, the fabrics that we wear, the words that we use, all of this is contained within the Maha expression, Make America Healthy Again. It's a holistic approach. And I am sitting here just, I can't even believe it. I don't even know the words to say it. I can't believe that we are here living in this life right now. Ruti Guten says, trust your gut, speak the truth. Everybody enjoy those wins. This has been a journey of so many years for many people. We have been boots on the ground since 2012, 2011, really, and God wanted us to be close to some of these conversations. And the Perez sisters, we had an opportunity to meet Robert F. Kennedy a few times, and God created an opportunity for us to meet him on one of those amazing moments. Well, when he declared his independence from the Democratic Party. I'm going to bring up the picture right now. No, not the countdown. I apologize. Here we go. That's my sister and I, the Perez sisters, with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. This was at an event that he hosted in Brooklyn. And the way my sister and I mean, we've been aware, especially through Cafecito Break, especially going back to 2010 and, you know, being focused on holistic coaching, which Ruthie and I graduated from IIN. And then when we were producing our Monday morning podcast, it was instrumental to us to always bring wellness into the conversation, and wellness on every level. And it was in those early days while we were producing this podcast, in particular, Ruti Guten was very instrumental of always being a squeaky wheel about bringing in the conversations about vaccines, what's in the flu shot. And when it was 2019, we already knew about the coronavirus. We were already reporting it. And so then when 2020 came around, we kind of knew what was going to come up. And you're right, Ruti. I'm so happy that you're here at this moment. We shared this moment together, and it's what brought us together. Yeah, and it's what my sister said the other day. We were Maha-ing before we knew what Maha was. And this is, you know, a lot of times when we're moving through life and we've, you know, COVID woke a lot of people up because we realized many things. If we were trusting the government, if we trusted people in white coats, but we didn't really study who was in relationship and who was owned by who and who was beholden to who, what those relationships are like, what it means to be locked into contracts and not being able to disclose things, almost like this elite bubble of folks who, you know, were very comfortable dictating life to us globally and making suggestions, mandates, creating situations where many people were censored and weren't able to communicate effectively things that we were learning about the mandates, things that we were learning about the rollouts, things that we were learning about our loved ones being sick, and the horrors many of us experienced when we couldn't visit our loved ones in the hospital, or we couldn't appropriately say goodbye. and the shadow banning. Cafecito Break has experienced a lot of shadow banning and deplatforming. And there were moments where we were excited to share content around RFK, and that gave us a strike, a removal. In fact, when we met RFK the second time, which was when he officially declared his independence in Philadelphia, we were very excited to share that exclusive footage on our page, and it didn't go anywhere. This man, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., has been incredibly censored by mainstream media, by folks who turned their back on him the moment he started questioning, the moment the Democrats realized they didn't have a stronghold. And for many of us, we grew up maybe with more democratic leaning, liberal thinking ways. And not that all those ways are wrong, but that, you know, for us, for me in particular, being in New York, being a Latina, the way and still the way that's advocated now is, you know, be a Democrat. That's what you do. You just got to be a Democrat. And the unbelievable pressure that one faces when you realize that the party has walked away, the party has left you. And so here this man, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., has been through such a ordeal that most people don't even know about, because whenever he's covered as the anti-vaxxer, which he's not. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is not anti-vaccine. In fact, he's vaccinated. His wife is vaccinated. His children are vaccinated. But he's for the science. And science is ever changing. And science without debate is propaganda. I also want to take a moment to shout out the lions that have been a part of this journey. John Gilmore of Children's Health Defense. When we interviewed him, he told us that this felt like an overnight success of 20-something years. 20-something years. Can you imagine? Kennedy is heard him saying often that he prays every day for God to give him the opportunity to be able to serve in the way that he can. And today, on February 13th, 2025, everyone here who's tuning in, who's hanging out with me, we're a part of history. We're witnessing this, but we cannot stay on the sidelines, because wherever you are, in whatever corner of the world you might find yourself in, we are needed to be little instruments of more wellness. And as I've said, Maha wellness is not just nutrition. It's what's in the soil. It's what's in your water. It's drinking plastic chemicals. When you're drinking plastic water, from the plastic water bottles, is engaging in a conversation that is more holistic. Another reason we were drawn to supporting RFK Jr. from the very beginning is also RFK Jr. brings this beautiful, intellectual, gentleman-like, respectful way into the spaces that he occupies. He can speak about the hero's journey and go deep into a very spiritually enlightened conversation, and he can go deep and break things down in a way that most people I know don't know. This man's intellect is now going to benefit us, not just in the United States, but what we do here in the United States has ripples all over the world. And so I'm going to wrap this up here. I just want to say thank you. I find myself in disbelief I am completely, it feels like New Year's. It feels like New Year's. Feeling good now. I'm going to go to some of the chats, read some of the comments on Instagram. People are celebrating, little hearts, laughters. They called it RFK Jr. Yup. Get the Ratas out. Those darn 48. But hey, at least I'm grateful to the 50 something that voted. And to wrap up, I'm going to wrap up with a comment from Mr. K. Ravel. History was made today. Today is a good day. Today's a good day, mi gente. It really, really, truly is. I'm gonna see if I go to I'm gonna try to find YouTube channel, or maybe no, I'm already on that. All right, mi gente. Cafecito Break. We are indie media platform based in New York. Please connect with us. Follow, subscribe. We're 100% indie, and we've been big supporters of RFK Jr., and we will continue to be. Thank you, everyone who's joined us today. Please subscribe, Cafecito Break. We post on Instagram every day. You can find us there, Cafecito Break 10.0, 10 times taken down by Instagram. So we wear those stripes proudly. But everywhere else is Cafecito Break. Mondays, we host a New York Freedom Fighter X Space, 9 p.m. Eastern Time. And then we have a YouTube channel with my sister called Spicy Spirituality. We also have a Substack that you can become a member and get some of the inside scoops and tea and updates. And we are also hosting a happy hour at a local restaurant in Brooklyn that got hit hard during the COVID era. And it's our way to hold the light for small businesses as they were also crushed. And believe it or not, small businesses are part of the livelihood and the health of our community. Love you guys. Congratulations to everyone who's a part of this win today. And we'll see you soon. God bless.